At Camp David, the endless stream of visitors is about ended, and President Carter is winding down his domestic summit, cranking up a speech. Leslie Stahl reports from the White House.
The White House announced today that the president will address the nation from the Oval Office on Sunday at 10 p.m. time. While the president remained closeted at Camp David with his political aides today, Mrs. Carter told the Women's National Democratic Club that the problems facing the nation are broader than just energy.
We can solve our problems. Jim is optimistic about the fact that we can find solutions, we can find answers, and we can solve our problems. Not overnight, but we can solve our problems.
While Mrs. Carter was urging the nation to rally around the president, Jerry Worf, head of the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees, who went to Camp David yesterday, said there is still time for Jimmy Carter to be born again politically, but voters should begin thinking about alternatives, Kennedy, Mondale, or even a Republican.
If we could survive Richard Nixon and Gerald Ford, how much worse could Howard Baker or George Bush possibly be?
There were no groups taking helicopters up to Camp David today, but media advisor Gerald Rafshoons invited a select number of national journalists to fly up tomorrow, including the 3 network anchormen, Walter Cronkite, John Chancellor, and Frank Reynolds, plus newspaper editorial writers, political columnists, and at least 1 magazine editor. Rafshoon explained that the president wanted to brief them about his upcoming speech to the nation. As for complaints about the domestic summit, Connecticut Governor Ella Grasso denied a CBS News report which said that she had called the White House to complain that one of her political enemies had been invited to Camp David. But sources here insist that the governor's complaint was telephoned in to the White House. Leslie Stahl, CBS News, the White House.
Politically, there will be a lot riding on the president's speech. As Senator Jackson said the other day, this is D-Day for Jimmy Carter, and he knows it. He must also know that every public opinion poll puts more and more pressure on him, and the latest one from CBS News and the New York Times gives him little comfort. Bruce Morton reports.
The president may be up on the mountain, but he's down in the polls. Mr. Carter's stock with our sample is falling like a political skylab. Last January, 42% of the people we interviewed approved of the job the president was doing. His approval record stayed around 40 in February and March, then plummeted to 30% in June. And in this week's poll, it's down to 26, a drop of 4 points in 1 month.
And the disapproval is widespread, spanning differences in age, income, education. Democrats disapprove, Southerners disapprove, so do blacks. The disapproval becomes even sharper when we asked about specific issues. The president's handling of the economy, of energy.
By a 5 to 4 margin, our sample felt Mr. Carter is not the kind of person who shows good judgment under pressure. We asked the Democrats we polled who the party's nominee should be in 1980. Edward Kennedy, they answered, in a landslide. Even in the South, Democrats in our poll preferred Kennedy by better than 2 to 1, and blacks were for him by better than 6 to 1. What if Kennedy were out, we asked, and the race were between Carter and California's Edmund Jerry Brown? Carter won, but just barely. Even in the South, he was just 2 percentage points ahead of Brown.
That probably is an anti-Carter, not a pro-Brown vote. Other polls indicate voters don't know that much about the California governor.
Mr. Carter's unpopularity is not directly linked to the gas lines. We asked who's responsible for the oil shortage, and our sample blamed the American oil companies and the OPEC nations a lot more than they blamed the president. And people are still skeptical about the shortage. Asked, is it real? People in our poll said no by better than 2 to 1. Virtually the same answer we got a month ago. But the shortage, real or not, is having an effect. Almost 40% of our sample said they'd had trouble buying gasoline, long lines, or closed stations. That's up from 30% a month ago. The percentage was highest in the Northeast and West, higher in big cities and suburbs than in small cities and rural areas. Almost 2/3 of the drivers we polled said they'd cut back, usually on pleasure driving and shopping. But only 1 driver in 5 said the effect of the shortage was serious. And most people we polled said they hadn't changed their vacation plans. What to do about the shortage? Our sample narrowly favored gasoline rationing, opposed just letting prices rise, favored the new 78-degree temperature limit in public buildings, thought heating oil supplies were more important than gasoline.
And over half the people we polled thought that for the next few years, we'd have to learn to live with gasoline shortages. Bruce Morton, CBS News, Washington.